This is iOS 11, and it's finally here. So iOS 11 has been unveiled back at WWDC back in June. And some of you watching this video probably already have iOS 11, the beta installed. And the official release is going to be by the end of this month. So most likely next week, iOS 11 is going to be released. If not next week, then it's definitely going to be released by the end of this month. So yeah, who's excited for iOS 11? And speaking of iOS 11, I've already done an iOS 11 top 35 plus new features video. But yeah, basically after 9 beta versions, iOS 11 is finalized. So all the features are in place. Most bugs have been squashed. So here's my full in-depth review of the main changes and the main features in iOS 11, along with my thoughts on how iOS 11 is as a brand new operating system. So yeah, grab some popcorn and enjoy. Okay, so after you install iOS 11, it will feel a lot like iOS 10, which basically felt a lot like iOS 9, which basically felt a lot like, you get the idea. So, I mean, it doesn't really feel like a completely new operating system. And that's because design-wise, there's not that much of a difference. I mean, yes, you do get the new wallpaper, and some of the old ones have now been removed, by the way. But apart from that, and a redesigned App Store logo, that's pretty much it. So this is the same iOS that you're so familiar with. Now, there are a couple of big changes in iOS 11. So probably the most significant one, or the most significant one on the iPhone at least, is the new control center. So instead of having to swipe through 3 pages that we had in iOS 10 for the control center, then the second one was for the music controls, and then the third one was for the HomeKit page. Instead of having to do that, everything has now been combined into one single page. And I think that overall this is a really, really good idea, having all the controls in just one page, which by the way is now a full screen page. And you can probably tell that you now have way more controls that you had before. But probably the best part about the new control center is that it's fully customizable now. So if you go to settings, if you go to control center, there's actually a new section here that allows you to customize the controls. So you can add toggles for things such as the camera, the torch, the time, calculator, and yeah, you can even add new ones, by the way, which we didn't have before. So for example, launching the notes, you can add an app so that you can automatically launch the notes when you wish to take, a quick note. Then you can add a toggle for recording a quick voiceover, launching the wallet, Apple TV remote, and so many more. Now, another cool thing about a control center is that you can even rearrange the toggles. But I do feel like this is a bit clunky to use, since you cannot actually hold on the toggles to rearrange them. You actually have to go into the settings, which can be a bit confusing, especially if you have a lot of apps. So you go into the settings and then you drag them. And yeah, it's a bit confusing since you can only change the order, but not the actual position in the control center for the toggles. Also, having a single page for the control center does bring a few downsides. So for example, HomeKit is not that easy to interact with now, since you have to open the control center, then you have to find the app, the HomeKit app, then you have to 3D touch on the app, and only then you get, the old iOS 10 HomeKit page, which in iOS 10 you can simply do by just doing a single swipe if you're on the third page. So yeah, it's a bit more difficult to use, I would say, in some cases. So overall, this is a great idea, and it simply makes using iOS so much easier and so much more intuitive than before. Okay, what else? Well, we finally have a file browser in iOS. It's called Files, and this is actually a huge deal. This was actually a feature that you have on pretty much all Android smartphones, actually all Android smartphones if you download certain apps. On Windows, you have this, on Linux, even on macOS. So iOS was the only major operating system that lacked a file browser. And from Files, you can access anything on your iCloud Drive, or even Google Drive, and other cloud storage services. So think of this as the Finder in macOS, or this PC or my computer in Windows. Yeah, it's really useful to have such a feature. And by the way, another big new feature is the new drag and drop support. Now, this is a bit more difficult to demonstrate on the iPhone, but basically you hold on any link or image, and then you can drag it in a different app, in a brand new app. This is again much more useful on the iPad since you have much more screen real estate to play with. But fun fact, it does work on the iPhone as well. Then we are getting a few improvements to the camera app as well. So unfortunately, if you want to change the quality, like the video resolution, for example, or the photos resolution, you still have to go into settings. Come on, Apple, please stop. Okay, moving on. We do get a few options for live photos. So a few new options, such as you can loop a photo, and then you also have this bounce effect, which is pretty cool. You use this for jumps or scenes in which you have a lot of movement. And then of course, the best one, my favorite one so far, is the long exposure one. Then we also get a couple of new filters, all of which have now been basically renamed to make it a bit more easier to distinguish. And not only that, but the filters themselves have been reworked in terms of how they work. So the skin tones are a bit more natural now. The landscapes are more vibrant. So definitely start using filters in iOS 11 for general everyday photography. Of course, it would be awesome if these could switch automatically depending on the scene, which is where that smart camera on the iPhone 8 or the iPhone edition might come into place. And speaking of the camera, there is one massive improvement coming in iOS 11 for every single device running iOS 11. And that's HEVC or H.265 encoding support for when you're taking videos, and HEIF for when you're taking stills. Okay, Daniel, so what does this all mean? Well, it basically means that when you take photos or videos, they will actually occupy between 40 to 50% less space, which is huge. This basically means that if you're the kind of person that takes a lot of photos and a lot of videos and you always run out of space, now you can basically take double that amount on the same amount of storage. How awesome is that? There's literally no need to upgrade your iPhone to a higher capacity. Obviously, unless you use apps or you download movies that aren't H.265. So yeah, you still kind of need it. And then apart from this, Siri is also getting a few improvements as well. So she now has a brand new voice. And by the way, this is how Siri sounds like in iOS 10. Hey Siri, how tall is Barack Obama?
Barack Obama is 6 feet 1 inch tall.
And this is how she sounds like in iOS 11. Hey Siri, how tall is Barack Obama?
Barack Obama is 6 feet 1 inch tall.
Which one do you guys prefer? I think she sounds way more natural now, but I kind of miss the old Siri voice, especially the original Siri voice. Anyone remember that? And then Siri also supports translations now. So for example, you could say, how do you say I would like to order a pizza in Chinese?
我想点披萨.
Then the lock screen and the notification center have both been redesigned. So they've actually been both merged into just one. So now if you swipe down, it will also lock the phone. And you can also access the camera from here by swiping to the left, which is pretty useful. And then you also get some small but very useful features such as do not disturb while driving mode. Now this one actually turns off the display, and it also silences all of your notifications if it detects that you're driving. And by the way, it detects this automatically based on the GPS, based on the compass, based on the gyroscope, and on the accelerometer. And it also reroutes all your calls through the car's Bluetooth audio system. So that's indeed a really useful feature to have. And then the App Store is also getting a few changes. So the biggest one is obviously the new redesign. So the App Store looks a lot more simplistic now, even though I still prefer the old long list view from before, which you can still access, by the way. So yeah, I think in this one, it's much easier to find the apps that you're looking for if you're looking for some apps. But yeah, the new App Store looks pretty nice, pretty clean, pretty modern, but I do prefer the more organized one back in iOS 10. Now, besides this, in Apple Maps, you do get indoor maps and you also get lane guidance. But probably one of my favorite features is definitely with the Apple Earpods. So we get a few new Apple Earpod controls. So previously you could have them so that a double tap would actually bring up Siri, and then you could ask Siri to go to the next song or increase or decrease the volume, for example. But now you can actually set them so that you can double tap on one of the AirPods, so let's say the right one, and if you double tap, it will skip to the next song. And then you can have the left AirPod so that when you double tap on it, it goes to the previous song or pauses the song or something like that. So you still need to use Siri, by the way, or your iPhone in case you want to change the volume. So that's a bit inconvenient, but now you can finally pause, play, and skip to the next song by simply using your AirPods, which is pretty cool. You don't have to scream. You don't have to speak to Siri anymore. Pretty cool. And apart from this, there's also a ton of small changes. So for example, when you're connecting to Wi-Fi and another one of your iOS devices is really close by, you can actually send over the Wi-Fi password so that you don't need to type your password again. And when you have a new device that you want to set up, a new iOS device, there's a new automatic setup screen that appears on your new iOS device. And if you have another iOS 11 device nearby, you can actually transfer a lot of stuff from that over, which is, again, a really useful feature to have. So again, iOS 11 comes with a lot of small, interesting, but very useful things such as this one. So these would be the main features, the biggest features in iOS 11. So what about performance? How fluid is iOS 11? Well, the performance was pretty bad in the first few beta versions. And then, it's expected to be pretty bad, especially in the first 3 or maybe even 4 beta versions. But actually beta 9 is really, really fluid. So this is actually the last beta, so ahead of the GM. And this one is really, really fluid. So I've had iOS 11 on the iPhone 7 Plus, which comes with an Apple A10 processor, the iPhone 6s, which comes with the Apple A9 processor, and then the iPad mini 4, which comes with the Apple A8 processor. Now, the most interesting device, performance-wise, to test out would be the iPad mini 4, since it's running on the same processor as the iPhone 6, but it's also running with a much higher resolution display. So it's almost 4 times the resolution as the display on the iPhone 6. But still, the iPad mini 4 is actually very fluid on iOS 11. Obviously, it's not as fluid as iOS 10 was, but it's really, really close. So overall, I would say that most of these devices have very, very similar performance to how iOS 10 ran. And in some rare cases, such as opening apps and closing apps, iOS 11 actually felt faster than iOS 10. But yeah, overall, don't expect to see a major performance hit with iOS 11. Now, speaking of performance and how iOS 11 runs, iOS 11 runs on the iPhone 5s or newer, the iPad mini 2 or newer, or the iPod Touch 6th generation. So essentially any iOS device running the Apple A7 processor or newer, since iOS 11 is now a full 64-bit operating system. Okay, so in the end, what do I think of iOS 11? Well, overall, it's not that big of a change as iOS 10 was, but it's still a very welcome improvement. Now, the biggest change in iOS 11 is on the iPad. So the iPad is simply an entirely new device with iOS 11. So everything has been redesigned basically from scratch. And in fact, the changes are so big that I'll actually have a separate iOS 11 in-depth review just for all the iPad changes. So definitely feel free to subscribe if you want to see that video, if you're interested in that. And also don't forget to enable notifications by simply tapping on that bell icon so that you're notified as soon as I upload a brand new epic video. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think of iOS 11? What are your top favorite features, your top 3 favorite features? And also, if you have enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like to let me know. And in case you want to know more about the next week's announcements, so the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 7s, which by the way might be called the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone Edition, I've actually done a final Leaks and Rumors episodes on both, in case you want to know everything to expect on next week's iPhones. And yeah, this has been pretty much it. So yeah, thank you all for watching. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. So Tech, signing out. Cheers.